showed the world that these principles are very important. And when did this all happen? It happened on the day that God gave us the Torah, Mount Sinai. All the Jews were standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, and they experienced this incredible revelation. Let's see text number 2, please. Ask now, after the early days that came before you, from the day that God created man upon earth, and from the end of the heavens to the other, has there ever been the likes of this great thing, or has anything like it been heard? Has a people heard the voice of God speaking from within the fire, as you had heard and lived? You were made to see, to know that God is the God, there is none else besides him. The text 2 is taken from the book of Deuteronomy, which gives us a glimpse into the impact that the Torah has on the world and continues to have to this very day. Now, if you look at the last line that we just read, you were made to see, to know that God is the God. There is none else besides him. I'm going to read it in the Hebrew because it may be a little bit more familiar to some of us. And it goes like this. Ata harei saladas, ki Hashem hu Elokim eino novadai. We say this every time we take out the Torah on Shabbat. Before, on page 222 in our prayer books, before we take out the Torah scroll, this verse is said. What exactly is meant by these words? And so I'm going to propose today two things, a theological approach and a mystical approach. Okay? The theological approach is what was unique about the revelation from God on Mount Sinai. The first unique experience, unique thing that happened when God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai was, or to word it a little bit differently, the most unique aspect of the fact that God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai and how it differs from any other religious revelation, proclamation, prophecy, is that the giving of the Torah was considered a mass revelation. What does that mean, a mass revelation? There's a book called the Kuzari, which, by the way, if anyone has time to read it, it's a fascinating read. And it's almost like a dialogue between two people, and it is a dialogue between two people, between Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who was a great poet, and the king of Khuzar. Khuzar was a country in the southern part of Russia, the Khazar kingdom. And after this discussion that he had with Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and the Jewish sages, which at the same time he also had discussions with the leading Muslim and the leading Christian clerics, trying to understand, he was a brilliant man, and he wanted to understand what is the meaning and purpose of our existence. And so between having this discussion with these other world religions, he came to the conclusion that Judaism is the way to go, and he ultimately converted himself to Judaism, and the entire nation is said to have converted to Judaism, the Khuzaris. And so this book called the Kuzari, that's the name of the book, and in there, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi makes this argument for the revelation of Mount Sinai, as we see in text number 3. Moses, the first Jewish leader, was not like them, the founders of other religions. He brought the entire people to stand at Mount Sinai, for them to see with their own eyes, each in accordance with their ability, the revelation that he saw. As the verse states, they saw the God of Israel. They all could affirm to each other what they saw and heard. This removed from the heart of the nation the terrible suspicion. Perhaps all of this is just the claim of a few individuals that prophecy came to them, for it is not possible to create a conspiracy in full sight of the masses. So why did so many people, or why was the Torah given in front of the entire Jewish nation standing there? To prove that it actually happened, and to take away any argument that it was only one person who was on top of a mountain who had this revelation or had this insight or got this heard this voice, and that's how we should start the religion. But this happened in front of several million people. So at Mount Sinai, every Jewish man, woman, and child, more than 2 million individuals, directly experienced the divine revelation and heard God speak the Ten Commandments. This was not an event that was reported in the New York Times. It was not an event that one prophet said and one prophet claimed to have experienced, but this is something that everybody experienced at the same time. Now, why is that important to us to know that? One second here. There we go. Okay. Why is it important for us to know that this is a mass revelation? And that's the way God appeared to us. It's important because it shows on the validity of the Torah. And also it shows that we directly experienced it, meaning to say that it applies to us and it's for us. It was given to us, for us. It's not something that was given to some great sage or some holy person, Moses or whatever, but it was given to each and every one of us. Men, women, and children were standing at the foot of Mount Sinai. It is our Torah. And this is the theological reasoning of why this event is so important and how it impacts us even till today. But now let's go a little bit deeper. From a mystical perspective, the uniqueness of the revelation at Sinai runs even deeper. Remember that verse that I mentioned earlier, the last line in the previous text, that we saw that you were made to see, to know that God is the God and there's none other besides him. What kind of wording is the Torah modeling over here? What's the Torah telling us here? This is rather an unusual term. You were made to see, right? What does it mean you're made to see? And what it's saying is that they saw the God of Israel. In other words, that the God of Israel was made real to them. In fact, let's look at text number 4. In the Mechilta, which is the Medrash on the Torah, tells us that when the Jewish people were standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, an incredible phenomenon took place. They saw what is heard, and they heard what is seen. This sounds a little crazy. Some of the some of the people that were teenagers in the 70s may have experienced something like this in Woodstock or something like that. But clearly that's not what the Torah is referring to. What exactly does it mean that they saw what is heard and they heard what is seen? What?
They saw the thunder and heard the lightning.
They saw the thunder and heard the lightning. That's what happened. But how? We see certain things and we hear certain things. Our sight is limited to the things that our sight is limited to, and our visual is limited to the thing, and our hearing is limited to things that we're privy to hear. So which is, if I would ask you a question, which is better, the movie or the book? What would you say? The book?
Book, but you really feel the movie was that.
Anybody on the Zoom wants to chime in here? Do you think the book is better? Do you think the movie is better?
It depends.
The book, the book, the book. Yay, book. Book.
There is no answer.
Okay. Mrs. Lichtenberg is an author, so she's sharing for
Book.
All right. So, of course, the question, which is better, can mean different things, right? It can mean which makes a stronger impression, or which experience is more meaningful, and so on. So there's no clear one answer. Everybody has a different experience when they either read or when they see the movie. They each tap into another part of our senses, either visual, hearing, or both, or all. But even if we say both, they tap into it differently. Our imagination, everything is impacted a little bit different depending on what the question is, or depending on what part of the book, what part of the movie, and so on. But one thing is clear, that there are two distinct, very important gifts that God gave us, and that is seeing and hearing. Let's explore each of these things. First, we're going to talk about the advantages of seeing, and later on in the class, we're going to talk about the advantage of hearing. Okay? We're going to get to it. When I see something, I see the thing itself. When I hear about something, or I logically deduce, or I logically have an experience, the knowledge is secondhand. Let me start again. When I see something, I see the thing itself. When I hear about something, or I logically deduce its existence, the knowledge is secondhand. I heard about the thing. My knowledge of it is derived from a different set of truths. When I see something, there's no question about it. Seeing is believing. When I hear something, I have to start to develop what exactly that thing means. Sight is more convincing than hearing. It makes a more powerful expression. This is why it says that ein aid nas adayam. A witness cannot be a judge. Someone who witnessed a crime cannot also be the judge. Because when you see something, everything is different. You saw it, and it's very different than when you're hearing the case. Physical things can be seen because they are real in the same way that we are real. We can have direct experience of them. On the other hand, spiritual realities are not real in the same way or the same sense that we are. So we cannot experience them directly. We can only hear about them via other mediums, through their effect on our lives, by means of logical proofs, whatever the other mediums are. But the point is that a spiritual experience has to develop, but a physical experience, something that we see, we can touch, that we have an immediate response to it. Based on this, we can appreciate a deeper meaning of the fact that at Mount Sinai, they saw what is heard and they heard what is saw. Let's see text number 5. Does anybody want to read? On Zoom or in person?
Sure.
Okay, we have someone in person going to read. Go ahead.
This is what the giving of the Torah achieved. They saw what is heard, and they heard what is seen. That which is ordinarily heard, i.e. spirituality and godliness, which can only be perceived through hearing, the people of Israel perceived with the certainty and tangibility of sight. They saw godliness. On the other hand, material things, which are ordinarily seen, they now heard. The materiality of the world was like something that is perceived by hearing or by logical deduction.
Thank you. So to summarize, both on the practical level, as the Kuzi spells it out, the mass revelation, the theological, and on a philosophical, mystical level, like we just read in text 5, the revelation at Sinai made real the truth of God to those who stood there in the most fundamental and absolute way imaginable. So not only the fact that we were there convinced us that the event happened, but also what we experienced at that moment convinced us that this event happened. Okay? we were there and we saw it, we felt it, we heard it. It attacked all of our five senses. Yeah.
So it's not really fair to compare a book and a movie because there's a third thing, which is being there. You can read about an earthquake, you can see a movie about an earthquake, or you can be in the earthquake.
Excellent point. You're right. So that'll be an added dimension that question didn't address about the movie and the book. Very good. Because experiencing something is another level that we didn't touch upon in that analogy with the hearing and the seeing. But when it came to Revelation of Mount Sinai, we certainly had that element as well. Very good. Thank you. Yeah. So here we have the story, this monumental, fundamental impact that this revelation of Mount Sinai had on the world and impacts us till today. But what happened right after that? The next thing that happened was extremely devastating experience. Let's see the next video, please. Pause it 1 second. As you can see, Nick is using the computer my daughter used last week because the last 2 weeks we were in quarantine, so they did online school. And so she is very proud of herself, so she gave herself a nice name.
It was the best.
That's it. She has a healthy self-confidence. Go ahead.
The people saw that Moses delayed in coming down from the mountain, and the people massed upon Aaron, and they said to him, "Arise, make us a god who will go before us. For this man Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Remove the golden rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." He took them from their hand, and he formed it with a graving tool, and he made it into a molten calf. And they said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." They arose early in the morrow, and they offered up burnt offerings, and brought peace offerings. The people sat down to eat and to drink, and they got up to make merry. Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tablets of the testament were in his hand. The tablets were the handiwork of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. And it was when he drew closer to the camp and he saw the calf and the dances, Moses' anger was kindled, and he threw the tablets from his hands, and he broke them beneath the mountain.
Yeah, I will repeat the questions in the future. Sorry about that. So what happened? Jewish people receive the Torah, this personal treasured gift that God had, gives it to the people. 40 days later, they sin, the greatest sin, building a golden calf. Moses is so angry that he goes and he breaks this covenant, or this 10 commandments that connected the Jewish people to God, and he goes and he shatters them. How could this have happened? How did the Jews, how did the Jews sin so soon after the great revelation of Sinai? How could they have made such a huge mistake? After all, the very first commandment is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am the God, your Lord, who took you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And what does he say? Do not have any other gods before you, before me. How clear could God have been of these instructions? Yet, so soon, right? 40 days. We're not talking about years. We're not talking about months. 40 days later, they already did this exact transgression against God. In fact, according to some opinions, this is the single greatest failure of the Jewish people in the history of mankind. We're going to see in a moment why the sages say this. What could have happened? How could they have taken such an important part of history, this gift to the world of the Torah, and said, we don't care about it. We're going against it. Let me ask you a question. What other biblical story does the story of the broken tablets remind you of? Give you a hint. We just spoke about it a couple of weeks ago. So the story of the Garden of Eden. Very good. Why the Garden of Eden? What happened in the Garden of Eden? God tells Adam and Eve, don't eat from this tree. Don't eat from this tree. What do? They go and they eat from the tree. What did God say? Don't eat. Immediately they go eat. What is going on with these people that God created? Is God just one big failure that he keeps on making these faulty individuals that just do not know how to follow instructions? What is going on over here? And because of that sin, they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Human suffering began to happen. Pain in childbirth. They had to work hard. They couldn't live a tranquil life. All these things started to happen once they did. Couldn't they get it right this time? God says, don't make any idols. There's one God. That's it. But if you look at the text, we find a very interesting, nuanced words when we talk about this gift that God gave the Jewish people called the Torah, called the Ten Commandments. And the key word we're going to focus on now in text number 7 is the word charut. How did God give us the Ten Commandments? He gave it to us engraved on the stones. As we're going to see, the word charut, when you change the vowels, spells out the word cherut, which means liberation or freedom. So engraved could also mean freedom. Let's see text number 7. This is the meaning of what is written. I said you are divine, and that supernal beings you are all. Indeed, like Adam, you will die. Had the people of Israel waited for Moses and not done that deed, neither Galut, exiles of the Jewish people, nor the angel of death would have had any power over them. Thus it is written, the writing was the writing of God, charut, engraved on the tablets. What is the meaning of charut? It means cherut, freedom from exile, and cherut from the angel of death. That if they would have not sinned with the golden calf, they would have not experienced, that we would not experience till today the angel of death or pain and suffering in exile. But when the people of Israel exclaimed, all that God has spoken we will do, and we will hear, God said, I command one mitzvah to Adam for him to fulfill, and I liken him to the ministering angels. This people who will fulfill 613 mitzvahs is not fitting that they should live and exist forever. But when they proclaimed, this is your God, O Israel, they became mortal. In other words, when God gave us the Torah, God says, wow, you are a special people. So I'm giving you the 613 commandments. Now I know God only gave us the 10 commandments, but the 613 commandments are found within the 10 commandments. In fact, if you, in the appendix of the lesson is 5.2, you'll see this picture, and it explains each of the 10 commandments, how we have the 630 commandments from those 10. But for now, when God said that the Jewish people said, I will do and I will hear, in other words, they willingly accepted upon themselves these laws that God has given them. God says, wow, anything I've said previously, I'm erasing. We're starting fresh. You will live forever. You won't have to work. You won't experience pain and suffering. No exiles, nothing. But the moment you sin, then God says, sorry, you became mortal again. So said God, you followed in the ways of Adam, the first man, who did not hold out for 3 hours. And on the 9th hour of that day, death was decreed on him. I said, you are divine, but because you followed in Adam's path, indeed, like Adam, you will die. Yeah.
So, not everyone was participating in the golden calf,
Correct.
but everyone was punished because obviously we were going to die. So, how's that work?
Excellent. Okay, so the question is asked over here in class that not everyone participated in the golden calf, right? And yet everybody is punished. So how does that work? I think at the end of today's lesson, I think that question will be answered. And in short, though, just not to keep it to the end of the lesson, in short, what happened at the moment that they sinned with the golden calf is that they came to God and they proved to God, not everybody, but all those that were participated in it, said, we cannot live a life that is based upon you dictating to us what we need to do, but we need to have space to form our own opinions and to make our own decisions, even if it means that sometimes they're going to be bad decisions. Let's explore this a little bit more. When God gave the 10 Commandments, that moment, God was in such a good mood, and God said, I'm going to reset the creation from the beginning. We know that Adam and Eve sinned, and they brought havoc to the world, but I'm willing to reset it. I'm going to set it the way I originally intended the world to be created. For you to live out your life in peace, harmony, in the Garden of Eden. In fact, that's what the word cherus means, freedom. God wanted us to live a life of ultimate freedom, spiritual freedom, free from any worries, any anxiety, any headaches, any challenges, pain, suffering, and so on. And in granting the Torah to the people of Israel, entrusting them with his blueprint of creation and the fulfillment of the divine plan for life on earth, God had pressed the reset button of creation for them, restoring the world to the state of perfection. The first tablets equals the state of perfection similar to the Garden of Eden, as we can see on the screen. When they sinned with the golden calf, that was similar to the sin of the tree of knowledge. Moses came down and saw the sin and saw them dancing and celebrating. He broke the tablets, similar to the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And now the tablets have been broken. We have to experience life as we know it today, the real world. Okay? But that's not it. The world wasn't over. In fact, God did want the world to be over. Yeah.
Couldn't Aaron have just said, no, don't build it?
Very excellent question. Is that in the chat?
Yes, that's in the chat.
Yeah. Couldn't Aaron have said not to build it? And we know that Aaron said, bring me your gold and bring me your jewelry, and we're gonna put it into the fire. Aaron, of course, was the sage of all sages, or the most righteous of people at the time. And he certainly would not violate God's command. If you look at the text very slowly, you see that Aaron is actually just simply stalling for time. He knew that Moses, the days are here, and they're just miscalculating by, I don't know how many hours, 24 hours, whatever, it was not even. And he was trying to stall for time. And at some point, Aaron felt that his life was being they were about to kill him because he was stalling and stalling and stalling and stalling. And he said, you know what, I'm sure nothing's going to happen. Let's throw it in. It's just gold. It's nothing. But somehow this golden calf came out of that fire, which is why Aaron really had wanted nothing to do with it. So Aaron tried to stop it as best as possible. The people were forceful to clearly make this God. And God was so angry, and he was happy that Moses broke the tablets. And he said, actually, I want to break up my relationship with the Jewish people. I want nothing to do with them. This is not cursed people, but this is a pathetic people. People who have no respect, no appreciation. In Hebrew, it's called hakaras hatov. What does hakaras hatov mean? Someone did something nice to you, show a little appreciation. I took you out of Egypt. I sent the 10 plagues. A little something. God wanted nothing to do with us. Moses, being the faithful shepherd that he was, the true leader of the Jewish people, came begging God, said, God, please, please forgive them. They didn't mean it. It was unintentional. Please forgive them. Have a little compassion. What's the world going to say? He used every argument he can use to defend the Jewish people. Eventually, God says, you know what? He declared the 13 words of forgiveness, Hashem, Hashem, Karachum V'chanun, and God forgave the Jewish people. So what happened? Was everything set right? Did Moses convince God and then everything was good from there? Not necessarily. Let's see the video for text number 8 on page 153.
God said to Moses, "Carve yourself 2 stone tablets like the first, and I will write upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke." He carved 2 stone tablets like the first, and Moses rose early in the morning, and he ascended Mount Sinai as God had commanded him, and he took in his hand 2 stone tablets. And he was there with God for 40 days and 40 nights. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments.
What do we see? What happened over here?
Moses did all the work.
So based on these verses, we clearly see there was something happened. Moses rightfully and successfully convinced God to change his mind, but there was a different set of tablets that were brought to the Jewish people. What is this different set of tablets? What was different of this set of tablets to the first set of tablets? So let's go through this together on the PowerPoint, on the slideshow. In the first tablets, the purpose of it was the state of the world should be in a state of perfection. Right? God reset the world and restored the state of creation as the way it was before Adam's sin. The second tablets reverted to a world tainted by sin, death, and hardship. And now death and struggle was introduced. The first tablets were made by who? By God. The content was divine and the medium was divine. God said what to write, and God wrote it. The second set of tablets, God said what to write, but Moses wrote it. Okay, human intervention or human interaction. The Torah itself, the first set of tablets, contained only the written Torah. The second set of tablets contained the written Torah and the oral Torah. Wait a second. Doesn't make sense. The first set of tablets, which was in a state of perfection, in the state, the way the world was supposed to be the moment it was created, made by God, written by God, dictated by God, everything by God, that should have contained everything, the written Torah and the oral Torah. That we find a little different, that the second set of tablets that was divinely given, but written or carved by Moshe, that has more than the first Torah, the written Torah and the oral Torah. What exactly is going on over here? So let's go through this slowly, okay? The first item, and this is all, of course, based on the text that we just read. The tablets were the handiwork of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. That's the first tablets. The second one, God said to Moses, carve yourself 2 stones tablets like the first, and I will write upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. In other words, with the first tablets, both the content and the medium were divine. The second tablets, the content was divine. The medium was a human manufacture. Why are we talking about this? It's very important to understand how the Torah came about. And it's important for us to know not only the history, but also the reasoning and the rationale behind what we study every single day called the Torah. According to the Talmud and the Medrash, the difference between the original giving of the Torah and the granting of the second tablets was a lot further than a new set of stone tablets, but it entailed a radical change in the manner that God communicated and continues to communicate. Let's see text number 9. Anybody on Zoom want to read?
We do have a question.
Okay, yeah.
God says he'll write on the second tablets, but then Moses writes them. Why did God first say he'd write them?
No, second time God says to Moses, carve yourself 2 stones. Oh, and I will write upon the tablets the words that were the first tablets, which you broke.
Is that like God guiding Moses' hand there? Or?
That's a good question. I think it's exactly like you say, Nick, that it's more of God speaking in, not third person, but God telling Moses what to do as if he's saying that he's doing it.
Okay.
Maybe holding his hand, but Moses is the one that's doing it. Yeah. Anybody want to read text number 9?
Actually, there's another interpretation.
Okay, yeah.
The first one, the writing is the finger of God, and you can read it from both sides. The second one was perhaps a little less of God's, it was not really that, it was God's finger. You could only read it from one side, so that Moses had to write that. It wasn't, it was divinely inspired, but not divine.
Right, so the stones itself, you're saying, look different. That's correct. The first set of stones was, when God wrote it, you can see it through and through. Read it the same way from both sides. And it was a miraculous set of stones. And in fact, if we look at the final letters, like a final mem, if you make a circle, right, to make the final mem, then the middle will fall out. But in the first set of tablets, miraculously, it floated within the tablets. Because there was the whole set of tablets was a miraculous phenomenon. But the second set of tablets written by man had a human limitations to it. Very good. Thank you. Okay, so did anybody say they wanted to read 9, or should I just read it?
I can read it.
Oh, okay, go ahead. So unmute yourself.
Yeah. And it's 9, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Said God to Moses, do not be distressed over the first tablets, which contained only the 10 commandments. And the second tablets I'm giving you also Halakha, Midrash, and Agadah.
For good measure, read text 10, please.
Yeah.
Did
Had
you say-
Israel not sinned with the golden calf, they would have received only the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. Why? Because the verse, as it says, Ecclesiastes 1:18, much wisdom comes through much grief.
Okay. Let's understand this a little bit, shall we? Clearly, there's a plan here. God wanted to reset the world as it was in the beginning. He did not want suffering, pain. But once they sinned with the golden calf, God says, you know what? If this is the way you want to have it, we'll have it your way. But I want your life to be enriched. I don't want you to go around feeling sorry for yourself, being depressed that you made a mistake and it's over. I'm going to give you opportunities to make the best out of your mistake. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you, in the second set of tablets, also the oral Torah, the interpretations and exposition, the Talmud, Medrash, coded Shulchan Aruch, which is coded Jewish law, the Zohar, and so on and so forth. I'm going to give you much more than you bargained for. How can it be that you're going to get so much more? Because we know that the human being accomplishes much more, as it says in Ecclesiastes. Much more wisdom comes about through more grief. We don't ask for grief. We don't ask for a challenge. But when we have it, we know that we grow as a result of that. Now, I want to take a moment to explain the difference between the written Torah and the oral Torah. Many of us are familiar with it. We've heard this before. So I'll briefly go over it just so we understand a little of the context over here. The written Torah essentially is referring to the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua also. Okay? Today we know the written Torah as being the 24 holy books, the 5 books of Moses, known as the Torah or the Bible, and the prophets and the writings. Those 24 holy books are the written Torah. Everything else is considered the oral Torah. What is the oral Torah? The vast body of commentary, legal deliberations, the moral, philosophical, and mystical works are all derived from the written Torah. How does the oral Torah come about? As the meaning of the word oral means, by word of mouth. What does it mean, word of mouth? We take the Torah, and by the way, God gave Moses with the 10 Commandments also certain principles that are used in order to properly interpret the Torah. You can't just take the Torah and interpret it, because you may be misinterpreting it. So you have to have certain guiding principles, primarily 13 principles, that are used to interpret the Torah properly. The oral Torah is all interpreted using these 13 principles and explaining the written Torah. When a sage is quoted in the Talmud, he's not saying what I believe, he's saying what I understand the verse of the Torah to mean based upon my interpretation using these principles of interpretation. Okay? So that is the written Torah and that is the oral Torah. The written Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, the oral Torah, the commentary we have until today, anytime we expound upon the Torah, that is considered the oral Torah. But then we have the obvious question. Why does the Torah consist of both a written and an oral component? If God wanted to communicate his will to us, why didn't he give us everything at Sinai? As you see on page 156, questions for discussion. Hello, you're God. You want us to have the oral Torah? Give us the oral Torah. Why give us hints and write the written Torah in code and make us try to figure out what the oral Torah is? And so there's many answers. Some of these answers we've discussed in previous JLI courses, but on a most basic level, there are very practical reasons. A, as our guide for life, the Torah addresses every question and issue that arises in our lives. No single work could possibly include all that information. The Torah simply cannot have written about technology. The concepts of technology, the challenges of technology, the blessings of technology is written in the Torah. But which app to download and how many hours a person should stay on each app or on their phone, that cannot have possibly be written in the Torah. For that we have the oral interpretation. In other words, the Torah was written in such a way that everything is found within it, but it doesn't contain every single possible scenario. Every modern invention that we have from when the Torah was given till today, including sliced bread and also lung and heart transplants or any other bodily transplant for that matter, is all written in the Torah. The laws, how to deal with it, and so on and so forth. But it's written in a shorthand form. Now, God surely could have told us everything, and he did tell us everything. Over the years in the desert, God continued to expound upon and explain to us through Moses, the sages, Aaron, what the Torah means and how do we understand the Torah. And this continues till today. So with the second tablet, God chose to do things differently. He says there's going to be a written Torah containing the basic laws and principles. But the task of interpreting these laws and applying them to the circumstances of life will be entrusted to the Torah sages in each generation, each and every one of us, who will use their own human faculties, not divine revelation, to accomplish this end. Okay. So now we ask a question on page 156. Which is the best and most effective way to communicate the divine will to mankind? A, by divine revelation, the first tablet method, or through human extrapolation of divine text?
A didn't work so well, so I guess it's B.
Okay. So we hear Simcha says that A didn't work so well, so that's why B. Anyone else want to recommend? You can write it in the chat.
But the sages were divinely inspired, weren't they?
Well, the sages were divinely inspired. It's a question, weren't they?
Yeah.
So the answer to that is we are all sages and we're all divinely inspired. To some degree, we just have to tap into that divine inspiration. But it's out there. It's at our fingertips. We just have to be prepared and be open to it. But what really happened over here between the first and second tablets? Clearly, A would be the best way, divine revelation. What better way of having a divine revelation? But the divine revelation is missing a critical ingredient. And by now, anyone in this class, I think, already understands where we're going with this. That, of course, divine revelation is better. Ultimately, it's better. Or I should say, theoretically, it's better. But ultimately, the plan B is better. Why? Because plan B includes our struggle, our quest for perfection, our quest for understanding, and our drive to dig deeper. Meaning to say that if we relied only on divine revelation, divine inspiration, we will be robots. God doesn't want robots. God has angels for that. He wants human beings. And human beings can only come about through human development, which is the second set of tablets. Which is why this extremely perplexing, misunderstood, not understood, hard to understand story happened when the Jews were standing at the foot of Mount Sinai. The Jews were standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, and we know the famous statement that the Jews said, I will do and I will hear. We will do it. We're going to do your commandments. Now tell me what it says. We didn't say, what does it say? It depends. Maybe yeah, maybe no. We said, we're going to do it. Just tell me what it says. We all know that part. But the Medrash says there's actually a little detail that may have been missed out of that story. And that is, let's see, text number 11. But before we read text number 11, I would like to take us back to, text number 1 on page 143, line 26 and 27. Okay? You see that? Oh. No, what is the word there? What does the word say? What's the Hebrew? Tachtet. Tachtet. So the text says like this. Moses brought the people out from the camp towards God, and they stood themselves beneath the mountain. The Hebrew text says, mitachat hahar. God took a mountain. This teaches us, let's see text 11 now, back on page 157, that God overturned the mountain over them like a cask and said to them, if you accept the Torah, fine. If not, this shall be your burial place. I'm going to drop the mountain over your heads. Boom, you're done. Wait a second. What is going on over here? Didn't we turn to God and say, Nasa v'nishra, we'll do and we will hear? What is it? Did you force us to accept it because we didn't want to die? What exactly is this medrash telling us? And this is based on the verse that says beneath the mountain, that Moses brought us beneath the mountain. It should have said he brought us to the mountain. It says he brought us beneath the mountain. What is going on over here? So let's see text number 12. How do we reconcile the saying of the sages that God overturned the mountain over them like a cask with the fact that the people willingly responded, we will do and we will hear? The Lubavitcher Rebbe explains as follows. The deeper meaning. When the people of Israel stood at Mount Sinai, only 50 days had elapsed from their exodus from Egypt, which was the most debased place in the world in terms of decadent character, as is well known. This was not sufficient time for them to make the transition from one extreme to the other and achieve a genuine recognition of the value of the Torah. Rather, this recognition was forced on them from above. When the light of truth was revealed to them so powerfully that they could tangibly see that the Torah and the mitzvahs were the ultimate good, and that without them, their lives were not worth living. In the most literal sense, they therefore proclaimed with all their heart and soul, we will do and we will hear. However, because they did not achieve this recognition in a progressive, methodical way by their own efforts, but rather as a gift from the flash, as a flash of illumination from above, hence the moment of the revelation had passed, nothing but a faint impression of it remained. So what happened over here? What exactly did the Jewish people experience at Mount Sinai? And two things happened over here. First of all, there was divine revelation. What does it mean, divine revelation? What exactly is divine revelation? Divine revelation is a typical high holiday service here at Chabad. What is that? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that people come, get inspired, and leave and stay exactly the same. That's what divine revelation is. I didn't necessarily do anything to change. I had this great experience, I read this amazing book. I'm so excited about it. A day later, I forgot what it says completely. Right? I read this inspiring article that motivated me to change, but I didn't change. I'm exactly the same. That's divine revelation. In other words, I was not moved enough to do something about it. I was inspired, but that inspiration is only a temporary inspiration. And this is a revelation from above. It can shake us out of complacency. But that is not enough. What we need is to participate in the journey if we want to really make a difference or to really change. If you want to get anywhere real, we really want to travel somewhere, we got to get in the car and go. What do we want? What does the Torah want from us? The Torah wants a permanent transformation. The Torah wants us to change our core. Therefore, the divine revelations and miraculous experience shake us out of our complacency and set us up in the right directions, but they don't really change us. True, the lasting expression, the lasting transformation will only come by means of the second tablets, in which we actively struggle to build a relationship with God, to understand the word, to interpret the word, and to apply the word. And this explains what we started off the class talking about. What is the difference between hearing and seeing? And also experiencing, which we already spoke about the experience. We had the mountain, that's this, we addressed that. But what is this idea with hearing? What happened? What really is hearing all about? What does it mean when we say we heard something? My teacher always used to say, in Yiddish, it works good in Yiddish, doesn't work so good in English. And it says, mit der Herst oder du der Herst? Do you hear or are you hearing? Is it just going in one ear and outside the other ear? Or is it penetrating you, right? When we talk about seeing, you see the thing itself. I saw that event, that image, that person, that transaction, I saw it. But when we hear about something, in a way, it's understood much more. What do I mean by that? It can almost be similar to the difference between objective and subjective ways of experiencing something. Seeing is objective, passive recipient. I saw it in flashing, which, by the way, it's amazing that you can have two people see, God forbid, an accident, and they each come back with a completely different description of what happened. It happened so fast that you saw it, and you did see it, and it'll come back to you, but it didn't enter into your core. When you hear something, you can't forget that sound. That sound. In fact, that you ask people that listen to music and they hear a song, it could be 50 years later, 20 years later, it takes you back to the first time you heard that song almost. You can almost smell where you were when you first heard that song. When you heard a song that penetrated you, that spoke to you. So when I see something, I take the entire scene at once. Then my mind proceeds to analyze what I saw, detail by detail. When I hear something, it's the other way around. I take in the information bit by bit, and then my mind reconstructs the idea from these bits. Totally different way of experiencing it, right? So this is the advantage of hearing it. The advantage of hearing it is that I'm learning it slowly but surely. When I learn it slowly but surely, bite at a time, I can absorb it. I can apply it. I can retain it. It didn't just come and go quickly, but because I'm an active participant, it means something to me. There's someone who said, a famous philosopher, teach me and I will know. Show me and I will learn. But involve me and I will, whatever, be the best. I don't know the word, but if you involve me, that's really the way I'm going to get it. So when we hear something, we absorb it bit by bit, and then it becomes part of us. You know the story with this guy who sees his friend Morris? I've shared this before, but it's a good one, so I have to say it again. This guy meets his friend Morris, and he sees he's very sad. He says, Morris, what's the matter? He says, oh, terrible. He says, well, what happened? He says, well, you won't understand. He says, what do you mean? Tell me. He says, 3 weeks ago, my uncle died and left me $50,000. His friend says, that's terrible. I feel so bad. He says, no, you don't understand. Last week, my great aunt died and left me $250,000. His friend said, oh, that's terrible. So sorry to hear. I mean, $250,000, very, good for you. God bless you. But it's, I'm sorry that your aunt passed away. He says, no, you don't understand. Last week, a cousin that I didn't even know about died and left me $1 million. So his friend said, I don't understand. So why are you so sad? He says, because this week nobody died. Yeah. So when we hear something, the benefit of hearing is that it penetrates us on a deeper level. I don't know if deeper level is the right word, but it penetrates us on a more memorable level. Meaning to say, a more participating level, a more active level, not in a passive level. The first tablets were seeing experiences. It was an overwhelming revelation that came from above. The second tablets was a hearing experience. We were actively involved. Human interaction. Moses was actively involved. It was a step-by-step process. And this is what the Talmud tells us on text 13, page 160. And he's answering the big question. The big question is, what happened to the broken tablets? Moses broke the tablets. What happened to them? Where did they go? Right? These are the hand of God. It's something divine, tangible that God made with his finger. What happened to it? Did you just throw it out? So the Talmud says both the second tablets and the broken tablets were kept in the ark. Two very important things to point out. First of all, look at the wording. The second tablets and the broken tablets. Maybe it should have said the second tablets and the first tablets. Why is it calling it the broken tablets? Because there's a very deep message here. And the message here is that God didn't make a mistake in how he believed in us. God didn't make a mistake by giving us the first set of tablets. God didn't make a mistake by giving us the seeing experience. But God said, this is a step in your process. You have to have a divine revelation, which perhaps may be why we sit in our mother's womb for 9 months to have this Garden of Eden experience. We don't need to do anything. We're just sitting and living in this glorious place, this comfortable place for 9 months. How amazing is that? This is why kids don't want to leave the tummy. They're so comfortable there. And so the first tablets had a role. They're going to be placed in the ark, which is placed in the Holy of Holies, in the most sacred room that the Jewish people have in the Holy Temple. May it be rebuilt now that we should once again have experienced that. But in that room, in that ark that was placed in the Holy of Holies, sat the Ten Commandments, and also a jar of manna, by the way, the manna. The broken tablets and the second set of tablets. Why? Because the first tablets reminds us of the inspiration from above, which is critical, and we have to still tap into it and know that we can have that inspiration, and we have those inspirational moments once in a while. And the second set of tablets reminds us that change can come through personal work, through our efforts. And so why the broken tablets? to remind us of our role. The broken tablets reminds us of our failures, but not to rub it in our face. It's to inspire us that whenever we fail, this is simply an opportunity to grow, or a lesson for us to grow. So when something bad happens, or a challenging moment, there was this employee who was in charge of a major project for his company. And he engaged in a specific deal, and the company lost $10 million. The next day, the CEO calls this manager into his office. The manager comes in, he says, all right, I know what you're going to tell me. I'm ready. You're obviously going to fire me. And so the CEO says, no, I want to offer you a raise. He says, well, a raise? I lost the company $10 million. He said, that was a $10 million lesson that we learned. If I fire you, it's $10 million lost. If I keep you on, we can learn from your mistake. That is a brilliant CEO. We make mistakes. The question is, how do we learn from it? Not say, you screwed up, you're out of here. You messed up, you probably will not make that mistake again. The new guy will, because you made the mistake and you learned from the mistake. So the tablets are broken. Why? To be as an inspiration for us, not to feel dejected and to give up, and not to forget to move on, but to realize that this is who we are, and we can grow out of these failures, out of these challenges. And this is what the story of the tablets tell us. The broken tablets, the giving of the 10 Commandments to us, and us making that big mistake by sinning with the golden calf. But at least we learned, hopefully we learned from that mistake, not to do that again, and only to grow from that. Thank you for joining today's lesson. And we'll, God willing, see you next week. I cannot believe the next week's already the 6th class, the last week of this course. Thank you very much. And we have a few more minutes. So let's go to figure 5.2 on page 165 in the text. I think it's a nice, interesting thing. And basically, everything that we have, I'm going to stop the share here. Okay. All the commandments, the 630 commandments, are found within the 10 commandments. So as a general rule, if I were to ask you which of the 10 commandments are the basis for all the commandments, and the answer is the first two, because in the commandments we have positive commandments and negative commandments. We have 365 don'ts and 248 do's. The first commandment is a do. The second one is a don't, right? I am God, your Lord. That includes all the positive commandments. Do not have any other gods includes all the negative commandments. But we can break it down even more. The first commandment, I am God, your Lord God, includes all the laws that pertain to the love and awe of God, prayer, the service in the holy temple, the signs that remind us of the relationship with God, tefillin, mezuzah, tzitzit, and so on and so forth. Okay? The second commandment, do not have any other gods before me. That includes us. The mitzvos that we have from the 613 are based on this commandment, have to do with the prohibitions of idolatry and idolatrous practices, the laws of ritual purity. So there's many laws about idolatry and idolatrous practices. For example, are you allowed to engage in business practices with an idolater? Because if you engage in business practices, then you're supporting someone who worships idols, and in a sense, in a way, you're funding idol worship. So there's a lot of laws that pertain to that. How about a city that worships idol? Ir hanidachas. How do you treat that? What do you have to do with it? So there's many laws that apply based upon this original commandment number 2. Commandment 3, by the way, also very interesting to point out. We're using the word, I've used it a million times and I use it all the time, the 10 commandments, but it's really called Aseres Hadibros, which literally means the 10 sayings, because there's 630 commandments that are based on the 10 sayings. So if you want to get technical, it's really not called 10 commandments, but everyone's used to it. The world is used to it. That's why we use that term. Number 3, do not take the name of God in vain. All the laws of prophecy, who's a prophet, how do we know who's a prophet, what's a false prophet, how do we appoint a prophet, all these things are based on this statement, the sanctification of God's name, not swearing falsely, and so on and so forth, blasphemy, false oaths, the fulfillment of vows, not to curse or insult one's fellow. Remember the day of the Sabbath to sanctify it. We learn all the festivals from that, the sabbatical year, the jubilee years. All of these are based on that command. Honor your father and mother. All the laws of procreation, circumcision, mourning relatives, inheritance, charity and aiding a fellow in need, gifts to the priests and Levites. All these have to do with it. Who is deserving of an inheritance to the parents? How do we know how to give charity? This is all within the laws of honoring one's father and mother. Do not murder. The mitzvahs governing preservation of life, capital punishment, capital cases, laws of warfare, and so on. So you see a pattern here. You see how it's working. So even though there's a basic law, but it's very easy to understand the sub-laws from that general law. And that's how we have all the different understandings. Do not steal. Do not be, it talks about all, excuse me, I skipped. Do not murder is the mitzvah governing, we did that. Do not commit adultery, laws of marriage and divorce, forbidden relationships. Do not steal, all financial and property laws, laws of your property line, who can own a piece of land, how long do you own a piece of land, all the transactional things, all these things fall into that category. Do not bear false witness unto your fellow. This has laws pertaining to hearing of evidence and the proper execution of justice. Judge shouldn't take bribes. You have to hear the court case only when both the defendant and the plaintiff are standing in front of you, and so on. Prohibition against slander, defamation, and gossip. And finally, 10, do not covet anything that is your fellow's. This, we learn the laws of love your fellow as yourself, laws pertaining to diet and dress. So clearly we see that the 10 Commandments are simply a springboard to all the other laws that we have till today. Any questions? Yeah, unmute yourself.